when we think about sustainability, we usually think about this kind of temple with 3 columns. There's the classic one that most people think about, which is the environmental. Oops, no. Then there's also an important one with the social, the whole issue of society, and economics. And these 3 columns are all very important, all possibly equally important for sustainability. So what we often get is this kind of diagram to show you the sustainability. So you have these different components and how they interact with each other. And some people see sustainability like this. It's the area of intersection of these 3 circles. Well, I personally, and I think the faculty sees it the same way as me, find this a bit of a limited, not very interesting version of sustainability. I prefer this one because to me, as an ecologist, I am fully aware we only have one Earth. And we can't just go and escape to another planet. Ignore the people who say that we can, it's not true. It just isn't possible, probably. So if we have the economy is not separate from society, it's not separate from the environment, it's inside society, and society is inside the Earth, the environment. So if you think about this, then immediately the whole concept of our limited resources and the Earth becomes much more important. This is partly the problem with the way that we run the planet, is that we run it thinking that the economy is a separate component, it's not inside the environment, but it is. So what is the problem? The problem is we have one Earth. It's not really a problem if we look after the Earth, but it is a problem because we're massively using the resources. We have an exponential population growth. And we have this issue with this thing called the ecological footprint. So what does this mean? It means that everything we do, the energy we use, where we live, timber and paper, our use of food and fiber and seafood, all this has an effect. It has an effect on forests, cropland, futures, on our carbon footprint, the energy that we use. So that's a whole big topic, the ecological footprint. But everything that we do has an effect somewhere else, both on the environment, on the economy, and on the society. And the critical thing is that us in the West, this is the ecological footprint for Hamburg, is 3 Earths. If everybody on the planet lived like they do in Hamburg, we would need 3 Earths to keep that up. We don't have 3 Earths. So it's a question of justice again. Do we have the right to say, we're going to take 3 Earths and you guys there in India, you can have half? So this is what we're talking about. So it's about trying to get back to one Earth that we're using up, and then to do it sustainably. And the interesting thing for me is that it's not just about talking about problems. So it's sustainability in our faculty is problem-driven. It's very important to understand what the problems are and to look at the really big problems, not just the small ones. But it's also important to come up with solutions. So it's very positive in that sense. It's solution-orientated. I just want to show you a quick favorite cartoon of mine. This is the Lorax from Dr. Seuss from America. And in this story, there's this guy called the Onceler who comes along and he starts cutting down these wonderful Lorax trees to make his products called the Thneeds, which comes from need. And he just keeps doing this, and at some point there's hardly any trees left. And the point is, his argument is that he wants to keep biggering and biggering and biggering. Does that remind you of anything? Like the way companies think is basically, they have to survive, yes, but they're always trying to increase their profits. And this is a system of working that just is not going to work in one world eternally, right? And in fact, this idea is not new. This guy, Alvin Toffler, in the 70s, came out with this book, Future Shock. And he's talking about the way our modern life is based on the idea that resources are endless, that we have more than one Earth. And he called this a Rust Belt way of thinking, very old-fashioned, rusty, not dynamic. It will propel us into future shock. And I would say it's not just a shock, it's just not going to work in the long run. So we then come up with the next question. How can we move from a view of focusing only on growth and profits to focusing on quality of life and ensuring that future generations can still live well? And to me, future generations doesn't just mean humans. To me, it also means all the other organisms that we share the planet with. Like, we also have a responsibility towards them. So what do we need for this? I think that we need a whole wide diversity of perspectives. We need different people from different backgrounds with just different takes on different issues. And then we need to also start working together, but really working together. So not just the economists in one corner, the ecologists in the other corner, the politicians in the other corner. We need to actually start talking to each other more. And I'm going to show you one example in my talk at the end of how this is slightly paradoxical, because currently you'll probably find out in your studies in the next year or so, there are a lot of the governments of the world are trying to find these win-win situations where you can have better environmental conditions and better economics, or better politics. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But these synergies, these win-win situations, we need to be careful that they actually really are win-win. Because I believe they can happen, but we have to be very careful that it's not a compromise. So I'll show you an example in a bit. First of all, what is diversity? So in terms of biodiversity, which is my field of research, I'm a plant ecologist, it's the issue of genes, all the different variety of genes, species, different habitats, ecosystems. But if you think about this talk today, and diversity, it's also, in a similar sense, different levels of a diversity. So views and approaches, people, cultures, languages, gender, sexuality, and in effect, it's just a variety of perspectives. So it's very important to have this multi-perspective component. If you think about habitats, then this kind of thing I work on, then we have this diversity of different habitats, like an open woodland, species-rich grassland, heathlands, forests, rivers, moorland. And here we've got a huge diversity of different species coexisting. And even though there's this huge diversity, we can still tell that one is a heathland, one is a grassland, one is a forest, right? So how does this work? How come we can tell? And one tool we use in ecology, or in ecology very often, is this idea of the filter. So the idea is that species that arrive at a disturbed site, so it's open for colonization, they are the potential species pool, and they have to get through different filters to be able to actually establish and become viable species there. And these filters are kind of abiotic. They can be driven by the environmental conditions, or biotic, by the other organisms. Or in this case, it can also be socioeconomic filters if you're talking about restoration, which is another topic in ecology. The point I'd like to make today is that it's a bit similar with you people in this room, and generally the diversity of perspectives we need at Leuphana and in the world. It's great to have this really mixed group, because what emerges and the ideas that you come up with for sustainability depend on all of you and how you interact. So what emerges as the culture of your cohort, your year from Leuphana, which I will see in a few years, I will see this develop, so I'm looking forward to that, depends on you, on your diversity, how you interact, and how much you can think outside of the box. And actually, the fun thing is, it's not given. It's like a strategic game, because you can change the filters of the system. It depends how you interact. You can decide what ideas survive and what drive change. This is a nice quote on how species are going to evolve to deal with climate change. And there are two main ways they can deal with rising temperatures. One is they can evolve, or they can become more versatile, so they can change their behavior. And I like this quote because it's kind of similar to what you need to do to somehow come up with sustainability solutions. So we call this flexibility phenotypic plasticity in ecology. And it involves adjusting to fit in like a high school kid who can float in the nerd, jock, and goth crowds. I'm sure you know nerds. Jocks are kind of the rough guys. And the goths, you know goths, right? And emos, I'm sure you know all these people, these styles. So for a bird, it means changing appearance or behavior to take advantage of the changing environment. So you need to somehow fit yourself into something new, come up with something new. So is it all about fitting in? No, not really. You need to know your habitat, but you also need to try thinking outside of the box. So the box is what has always been done before. It seems like it's a rule of nature, but it's not. And then you need to start doing this kind of thing, thinking outside of the box. So I'd like to provide you with two examples. One is a really nice one about Fairphones, which is a product from the Netherlands. The other one is the Werkhaus products from Germany. And I hope that they will portray to you that it's very, very useful to work in a transdisciplinary way and an interdisciplinary way. Interdisciplinary is across disciplines, so it's people working in different fields together, but also then working beyond the disciplines. And transdisciplinary is when academics and other stakeholders work on one issue together, hopefully from the start, not just, oh, later on we'll go and ask somebody what they think. So my example with a Fairphone is, this is an amazing story, because to me, when you get this phone, it says, this is not just a phone, this is a movement. There's only been 370,000 sold in the world. They're actually ethically and fair, the minerals are safe, and they're very environmentally friendly. So you might say, oh, that's not many compared to the billions of Samsungs and Apple iPhones being sold. But this phone has had a major change on the whole smartphone industry. I think through their influence, the other companies have suddenly said, oh, we want to now have an environmentally friendlier, ethically fairer phone. So for example, Apple used to be the bottom of the list for environmental phones, is now got the second best product. And this is partly because of this company. So small things can make big things change. Another really nice example from Germany are these Werkhaus products. And this is a company that started in the 90s. Their mission was to be environmentally friendly and socially friendly and fair, and to support cultural diversity. And they were told, you will never make it. You will never manage to have a product that will sell because it will be too expensive. If you're going to be that ecological, that socially fair, it won't work. It's working wonderfully. So do not believe people who tell you it's not possible, okay? And they're winning lots of prizes on top of that, right? So these are examples of synergies that work. They really can work. You've got to get the right idea, though, and you've got to work hard on it. I have an environmental example where it's not working so well, but I think it still can work. So this is a supposed win-win synergy from the UN. The UN came up with this challenge a few years ago called the Bonn Challenge, because they agreed to do this in Bonn. And they aspired to restore 150 million hectares of the world's deforested and degraded lands by 2020. Now that's a huge area. And this is, the reason they want to do it mainly is to mitigate climate change, so to counteract climate change. When you think about climate change, storing carbon, then immediately most people think of trees. Trees are good, they got lots of carbon. So that's why they thought, okay, then we can restore, especially if we reforest, then we get lots of carbon, we mitigate climate change. Nice idea, but it involves mainly focusing on trees. And so far, I'll tell you why that was an issue in a moment. So far, when you look at the website, this is where they are now. I looked about 2 months ago and there was a much smaller number, so apparently they're really achieving their goal. But how are they achieving their goal? For example, reforestation could be a plantation like this of eucalypts, which isn't very diverse, and has taken away probably other diversity that was a lot higher. Not a really diverse forest like this. So they had these maps of potential areas where they could restore. And they've got better now, but originally, for example, in southwest and western Australia, this huge area was what they said could potentially be restored. But it's not detailed enough, because within this area is this incredible mountain range, Stirling Ranges, which has more species of plants than the whole of Britain. They wanted to restore that. So you see, it's just too broad. And it's this idea that trees and forest equals nature and biodiversity. But often, for example, in temperate regions, if you have a forest, it's actually less diverse than if you have a grassland or a heathland. So if you restore everything to forest, it's not necessarily more diversity. You might combat climate change better, you might not. So what we need is, and this is what you need to learn, and it's a very nice place to learn it at university, is to come to reasoned judgment. We need judgment, and we need it to be reasoned, not just public opinion. Because public opinion can be very fickle, what we call in English. Fickle means just very easy and not based on reasoning. And so transdisciplinary research, for example, is not just public opinion. It's everybody has to work together and come to reasoned judgment. So this is what we don't want. We don't want to go from high diversity sites to a low diversity forest. What we do want, though, is to go from a very boring, a very sad inner city in northern England, or monoculture crops, which we need, of course, but we don't need them everywhere, or mining. We want to get from them to higher diversity things. That's what we want in terms of restoration and climate change mitigation. So to finish off, you got two examples from sort of products where the synergies can work. One example where environmental, where it isn't working so well, but it could work better. A lot of us ecologists are pushing to say, hey, wake up, you have to actually decide what you're restoring. It's great to restore, but make sure you restore the right things and do it properly. And that brings me to the nice symbol of Leuphana. I don't know if you've noticed, but first of all, the first time you look at this, it's a hexagon, right? It's a six-sided figure, shape. What else do you see? Do you see anything else? Does anybody see anything else in it? Yeah? You have to shout. Yeah, so if you stop looking at it just like a flat 2D, if you look at it 3D, it's actually like looking above, or it's actually a 3D shape. And this, to me, is the essence of sustainability. This is what we need to do to come up with a solution for one Earth and the fact that we're so many humans. We need to actually change our perspective. And we need to come to reasoned judgment and open your mind and think outside the box. And work together. And this way we can come up with something new and something sustainable. Let's see how we're doing. Oh yeah, not bad. On the final slide, I want to show you something amazing that happened to me a few years ago in Western Australia, the same area that we're showing on the map. There was a bunch of us ecologists from America and Europe, and we know quite a lot of the species, but not in Australia. We're in this bush. To you, it looks really dry, thorny, boring, right? Even to me, driving along, I thought, this is a bit boring. Then we got out the car, and we walked 10 meters. And we're like experts on plants generally, right? We couldn't get further than 10 meters because, for example, these carnivorous plants that eat insects. In Europe, we have like 2 or 3 or 4 species. There were about 15 species in an area like this. So to us, it was mind-blowing. This is a biodiversity hotspot. And so this is a different perspective. I think differently about diversity when I think about this site in Australia, because that's a completely different world in terms of diversity. And if we lose that, I think it's a tragedy. Even though just ethically it's a tragedy, but just in terms of what effects those species have on the system is another issue. So I'd like you to take that with you, change your perspective, talk to each other, do something new. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Vicky, for giving us an interesting view into the different and diverse topics of sustainability, and also mentioning the different research areas and how they are connected to each other, which is diversity within the perspectives and methods used as well, and how important that is. And I think we still have a couple of minutes for questions.
Don't be shy. It's only 800 people.
So we have an expert from sustainability, and especially a topic we haven't mentioned during the day before, which is important for diversity as well, which is biodiversity. Mm-hmm. We've talked about the other aspects, so just go ahead, ask whatever you'd like to.
What did you always want to know about sustainability? Didn't dare to ask. Yeah.
There's someone.
Right here.
So I was actually curious about your opinion about like climate change. It is very, very urgent to my mind that we now like do something about it, because like we're gonna change the world now, and we don't have a freaking clue what we are actually gonna do to this planet. And do you think you know, we just talked about at the very beginning of your presentation about everything affecting sustainability and what it makes up. Do you think your branch, the biodiversity especially, is at the moment the most urgent one? Because like we're just going to lose it and we can't restore it. Others, like, it would be another thing with economics and stuff like that. We just can't. So would you...
We can't what?
Restore.
Oh, we can restore. We can restore biodiversity. Maybe the problem is the talk's so short. We can restore, but we can restore maybe the wrong thing in the wrong place. So I hope you didn't get that message. We can restore. I didn't have time to tell you all the positive stories, sorry. We can restore, and actually grasslands and heathlands are a lot easier to restore than forest. But yeah, it's a very good question. That's something, I'm going to be giving a talk to everybody here, I think, in November on biodiversity in the Ringvorlesung Wissenschaft, Trick, Verantwortung. So there's lots of time then to talk about that. But the short answer of your question is, climate change is very important, yes, but it's only one of the key drivers that are changing the globe. And species loss and habitat loss, invasive species are other drivers. And the thing is, they interact with each other. And if you look at the causes of species loss, the biggest cause of species loss is actually habitat loss and invasive species, and then climate change. So actually the biggest cause is that we're just plowing up the earth and, you know, putting crops on there or putting eucalyptus plantations. If you look around, it's obvious, right? That's a much bigger thing than climate change. That's why that slide is quite interesting from the Los Angeles Times, because species are luckily pretty adaptable. Like, they do actually manage. The grasslands are really tough. We've been doing some experiments, and you can throw heavy rain at them, drought. Most of them survive. Incredible things. So actually, for me, in terms of climate change, I'm not very worried about the grassland or the heathland. The forest maybe more. But I'm worried about the fact that we are plowing up the planet. And of course, climate change plays a role. The key thing is the interaction. I don't know how the land use change interacts with the climate change. That's the key. The interactions are the tricky one, and they're very difficult to experiment with because you need such complex experiments. But it's a very good question. We can talk about that in the lecture then. That's a really good big topic. Thanks for the question. Any other ones? Down here.
Okay. Yeah, my question is if there's still enough time for stopping all this. I mean, the decreasing of biodiversity, the climate change, all this stuff. I mean, I came to this university to study exactly this because it really interests me, and I guess everybody's got a responsibility to do something, but I still meet so many people who are not caring at all, and I'm not only talking about the elder generation, I'm also talking about the younger ones, and this kind of depresses me sometimes, because I don't know, we still have to clean up everything which is already here, but if not everybody sees it this way, is it even possible?
Well, of course it depends whether you're an optimist or a pessimist. I'm an optimist.
Yeah, me too, sure.
Even though I have so much evidence to the contrary, I'm still an optimist. But actually, to sort of cheer you up a bit, I think it's possible. I really love the examples with the Fairphone. Because the Fairphone is like, and what we have here is in the sustainability factor, we have this big project called leverage points. And the idea is to find out the area where you can use a lever to change something in a small way and then change something over there in a big way. That's exactly, the Fairphone is a leverage point. So I think that the role that this university has is to produce people who create leverage points. And there's amazing stories of how people manage to change things. Or just think about smartphones. 10 years ago, nobody had a smartphone. Now everybody has one. And someone would have said, no way is that possible that everybody would have a smartphone, pretty much. So there are ways, and we can actually restore amazingly, and we just need to think more about like the picture with the economy and the societies inside the environment if we start thinking like that. And I think the biggest limiting factor, apart from the interaction, climate change, biodiversity loss or whatever, is people. So actually I feel like I should spend a third of my time talking to people and saying, I'm going to start a blog because it's like, this is the story. If we don't wake up to this, it's, you know, but I don't want to be a doom bringer, but then, and these are the solutions. And that's what we're trying to do in the faculty. Of course, it's a very tricky thing, but I think that's why we need clever people like you. We need people who think in a certain way and talk together. And then we can change things. And we just have to try. Otherwise, we go down the sinking ship like the Titanic and, you know, say, hey, bye then.
Yeah, okay, thank you. I just think it could be so easy to sell things like these. I mean, not only the products, but also the ideas, the responsibility for thoughts like this. It's just, I think I know in our time right now, we have to like do both. We have to create like good products, like economically friendly products, but they also need to be like cheap and fancy and good, and mostly it's this part which sells. And I think the environmental part keeps coming, but it's so slow, and I'm an optimist as well, otherwise I wouldn't study here, but it's just that it brings me down all the time. I mean, all these benefits and all these advantages, and always all this shit going on and dragging everything down again.
Our job is to actually talk to people and convince them that, you know, this terrible thing in Germany, Geistesgaia, is a disaster, right? This country is going to go down in the ship if we continue with Geistesgaia. Like, it's not. We should come up with the opposite. So maybe you can come up with a new slogan. You're like, this is Gaia. I don't know, something else, right? Something where we can have a great quality of life, we don't consume as much, but we have that many species out there, and we can go on a walk and really enjoy them. Instead of like, oh, look, we have 3 species here, great, but I've got my smartphone and my telephone and my car and my, great, that's a very rich world, you know? To me, it's not rich, but to other people it might be. So we've got to tell them, but not preach to them, we've got to work together. But first people have to be aware, there are all these. Other things are worth a lot, and that's why it's a shame you can't hear Berta Martin-Lopez talk. She's talking about values of biodiversity in Hörsaal 2, but you'll hear her as well another time.
Okay.
I better shut up. Yeah.
Sorry. No. Thank you very much. I think we could talk way longer on the topic. So we have seen lots of different topics within sustainability concerning diversity. What I want you to keep in mind is what another aspect Professor Temperton just mentioned is that we need reasoned judgment. And this is also concerning diversity aspects, and from the other perspectives, to gain reasoned judgment, we need diversity and diverse perspectives and research from different areas. And the last thing I love that sentence is you can change the filters of the system. And I hope this is what we're going to start with during the week and during the whole study. Thank you so much, Vicky, for sharing. Thanks.